Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. I've rewritten this script like 3 times based on new information coming out during the drafting period, and this also happens to be the third attempt at recording it due to technical difficulties that were completely my own fault. So I'm doing okay, I suppose, but if you couldn't tell, today's video is going to be a bit more on the casual side, as it's mainly just going to be me talking about some of the current events that have recently gone down with Blizzard and the private server scene, specifically surrounding the upcoming closure of TurtleWow. And if you're not familiar with that project, it's essentially an unofficial server built around making their own version of Classic Plus, which is basically just Classic, but with a bunch of new content made in the spirit of the original game. Private servers are nothing new to WoW, as they've pretty much been a thing since the beginning, but over the years, Blizzard has continued to maintain a pretty strict stance against them, with the two most notable examples of this being their shutdown of the vanilla realm known as Nostalrius back in 2016, about a year before the announcement of their official version, WoW Classic, and much more recently with their legal battle against TurtleWow, which has fittingly taken place amidst the recent rumors of Blizzard planning to release their own Classic Plus. However, this battle seems to have finally reached its end, as just a few days ago on April 11th, a legal document surfaced surrounding a supposed settlement between Blizzard and TurtleWow. Quick disclosure though, I am not a lawyer, and am pretty much just a guy reading documents on the internet with no real qualifications, so take any specific legal stuff or speculation on legal stuff with a grain of salt. But anyways, when the document first popped up, there was still quite a bit of discussion on whether or not it truly meant the end for TurtleWow, as it was still a bit unclear as to whether or not the remaining members of the team that hadn't been identified were within the actual jurisdiction of the US courts, since a lot of private server shenanigans typically happen overseas where they're a lot harder for Blizzard to stop. This uncertainty was supported by a few different theories, but it was primarily based on the fact that the description given for TurtleWow in the list of defendants simply stated an entity of unknown form, which seems to just be a catch-all term for anyone involved in the project, as well as the assumption that AFK Craft, a Hong Kong company listed directly after TurtleWow that supposedly claimed to be in charge of the operation, was potentially a shell company meant to act as a diversion of sorts. This also ties in with the popular theory circulating online that the TurtleWow team, or at least their servers, were actually based in Russia or somewhere similar. And while it's unlikely that we'll ever know the full truth of where they were based, as they were probably spread out across several locations, it did seem as though this injunction had essentially cut off the project's funding, as their payment systems, or processors, or however they got their money, seemed to be based in the US. And so, with a questionable future and a lack of funding, it was only natural that their player base began looking to the project's developers for answers. Answers that ended up being delayed 3 different times until finally this morning on April 18th, essentially a week later, where they finally gave their official statement, offering a polite farewell to their players and announcing the complete shutdown of the project, with its final day of operation being May 14th, which is actually the same exact day that another server known as Stormforge is also set to be shut down as a result of a cease and desist. But that's pretty much all there is in terms of news regarding the whole private server situation at the moment. So I suppose now would be as good a time as any to take a step back from the more objective lens and give my personal take on the whole issue. So just a fair warning, everything past this point will be opinionated. So if that's not what you're here for, feel free to click away. And if that is what you're here for, you've probably been waiting to see whose side I'm on, so you can either praise or yell at me in the comments. While I strongly encourage everyone to keep things civil, I will say that either way, the engagement still helps. But I will admit that my opinion here isn't really all that polarized towards one side or the other, as I think the situation is a bit more nuanced than a lot of people are making it out to be. So let me explain what I mean. Looking past the issue of legality, the primary reason TurtleWow, and private servers in general, exist is because they offer something that Blizzard doesn't currently offer, and the massive popularity and monetization of these servers does seem to prove that there's a market for this kind of thing, but it's one that Blizzard hasn't been very good at trying to partake in. And while it would make sense if this type of content ran contrary to their vision or values, Blizzard has already shown that they're willing to re-release old content and even add new things to that content while still finding ways to heavily monetize it, meaning that they kinda already tried to do the exact same thing as these servers. However, due to the fact that the private servers are still here, I think it's pretty fair to say that a lot of people are just unsatisfied with Blizzard's attempts. because the products they have released to try and cater to this market either haven't been given enough attention, were too bold in their changes, or because Blizzard as a company hasn't done enough to repair their overall reputation after repeatedly showing that they're oftentimes out of touch with their community. And there have been several times where they've doubled down on a decision that people don't really like, and in the instances where they have gone back and fixed those issues, they usually do it pretty quietly and don't always take a whole lot of responsibility. So essentially, even though Blizzard has tried to do some of the same things as these private servers, their attempts just haven't been enough to satisfy player demand. So with that in mind, it makes sense why people are so upset at Blizzard over these shutdowns, even though they are completely within their legal right to protect their intellectual property. Now, I can't say I entirely agree with how people are reacting over it, since I personally can't justify profiting off of stolen assets, even if they are still producing new content and the overall product ends up being something really special. But because some of these products are something special, at least based on their popularity, I can totally empathize with the tragic reality that Blizzard is essentially trying to destroy entire communities that want something they are fully capable of offering, but that they just aren't.
There's assumption that what is piracy? Piracy is about people want to steal stuff from you, right? That they don't want to pay any money and they want to get your content. But when you look at the fact that these people have, $2,000 PCs and they're spending $50 a month US more on their internet connections, clearly they're willing to spend money. So from our point of view, what we saw more and more is that piracy is the result of bad service on the part of game companies.
But to further explain my point of why the reactions are confusing to me, imagine if something like this were to happen to a different company that people love and that actually delivers the content their players are looking for. For example, how do you think the gaming community would react if someone were to copy and paste Elden Ring with a couple new bosses and weapons, tack on an in-game item shop selling mount skins or armor transmog, and then run ads on YouTube for it while taunting FromSoft on Twitter about how their unofficial version is better? Sure, there would definitely be some people that would be willing to spend money on that because it's new content, but I'm willing to bet that far more people would absolutely flip out over it, and I highly doubt that people would consider FromSoft evil for shutting that down, even if whatever new content they added was well designed. Why? Well, mainly because people already like From Software and are generally satisfied with Elden Ring and all of its offshoots, so there's really not that much of a demand for Turtle Elden Ring because people already trust FromSoft to give them the products they like, they have a firm vision that doesn't include mass monetization, and if there's something that players don't like or something they want more of while waiting for the next FromSoft game, then they'll probably just turn to the game's modding community because most mods aren't really monetized, and if they are, they're nowhere close to the same scale as the entire industry of WoW's private servers. And so, for World of Warcraft, a live service game that requires a monthly subscription to play and that doesn't have access to a real modding community and that's owned by a company that people don't trust to deliver the content they want, it's really not all that hard, even to myself, as someone who doesn't engage with private servers, to see why there's so many of them attempting to capitalize on this untapped market that players are clearly willing to pay for and support. And it's the existence of this untapped market that I see as the real problem with Blizzard. Because regardless of how you feel about the shutdowns, at the end of the day, nothing is going to change the fact that WoW is Blizzard's intellectual property. And that means they can do whatever they want with it, including shutting down really cool projects that decided to use their assets without permission. So, again, while I completely understand why people are upset at them for destroying a good thing that just so happened to be made from stolen parts, I do think it would be a little bit more reasonable to get more mad at them for not using those parts themselves to make the good thing you want to play, rather than just stuffing them into this rigid box where everything they do is just evil and terrible. Granted, they do still do stuff that's not so great, but my philosophy is that if you're going to get upset at something, don't just take the easy route and jump on the bandwagon of polarization. Or in other words, if you're going to hate on something, do it with precision. Be willing to acknowledge what they have done right, then look for the problems and figure out what's actually causing them. And if they keep making that same mistake, then get mad at them for not recognizing or attempting to fix it. Because when it comes to companies and community-driven projects made up of several hundreds or thousands of individuals all trying to work together to make something, while simultaneously running a business for said thing, I think it's very rare where it will ever boil down so simply to where this one is good and cool and that one is evil and bad. So yes, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I will completely agree that Blizzard really isn't helping its reputation by taking down Turtle WoW. But at the same time, I don't think they would have such a poor reputation to begin with if they had just listened to their audience and taken the necessary steps to actually satisfy the demand that led to Turtle WoW becoming so popular in the first place. But since I've talked long enough, I think this is where I end things. So let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video, as I've been trying to get a few more casual videos out here and there when I can, but I'd also like to hear what you guys think about the whole situation too. But that's pretty much all I have for you. So, thanks.